Welcome back to another episode of the SaaS Buyers Club. I'm your host, Omeed.
And I'm your co-host, Joe.
And this week we are interviewing Sharon Gillenwater. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you.
So, Sharon, would love for you to share a little bit about yourself for the audience.
Well, I am a late blooming entrepreneur. I like to call myself. I grew up in a working class family. I was the first in my family to go to college, and I didn't really know a lot about business or what I wanted to do. I started out as a writer and a journalist. Quickly figured out that wasn't really going anywhere, and I wasn't going to make a lot of money. And so I went to graduate school because I didn't know what else to do. The only thing I was really certain of is I wanted to be in San Francisco. I'm from San Diego. I went to UCSD for both undergrad and graduate school. And I met a guy who also wanted to be up here. So we got married and moved when I was about 30 and moved without jobs. And I got a job at the first place that offered me a job, which was kind of my style because I didn't know what to do otherwise. And it was this woman who had a startup, and they did localization. I don't know if the audience knows what that is, but it's translating user interfaces and marketing materials and websites into multiple languages for global markets. And so she said, you need to be in sales and you're going to do great. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm an introvert. I don't know how to do sales. But I took the job because I liked her and she mentored me, and I did do really well there. And I got the startup bug, and I really loved it. And then it went through like some mergers, and there was a lot of deal activity. And in the meantime, I had a baby and I wanted to be at home. So I quit. But it was a great experience. Oops, sorry. Let me turn off my notifications.
You could take the call and we'll...
So that was my introduction to the world of business and startups in the Bay Area, which it was 1996 through 1999, which was just the boom, like the biggest boom I feel like we've had. And it was nuts and it was fun. And there were parties every night. And so I really enjoyed it. And when I left that company, I started a startup that my sister-in-law had an idea for. She had been in business for a long time at Sony and HBO, and she was just full of ideas. She had a domain called fidget.com. She had an idea. She's like, here you go. Here's 45 grand for some seed money that I got from selling some other domains. Go for it. So I actually worked on that with my brother-in-law, and it was an email newsletter company. So an advertising focused business model. And we were scrappy and ran it and had a lot of fun with it. And in April of 2000, when the crash was already underway, somehow we were able to raise $3 million from an incubator down in LA full of ex-Disney people who worked on Disney's first digital products. So they were content people. And we were off and running, rented an office, hired people, signed long-term contracts for servers and all kinds of things. Well, a couple months later, they got a new CEO who said, we're going to pivot to biotech. And I thought we'd be okay because we had a deal, and there were other content companies in their portfolio too. So I thought, well, they'll probably just put us off to the side. But what they did was they pulled our funding. They actually never really fully funded us and shut us down because when you go with an incubator, they have more than 50%. And so they had 3 board seats. We had 2, called us, said, we're shutting you down today. All those in favor say aye. And then seconds later, in through the door came a process server suing me and my brother-in-law for fraud.
No way. Wow.
Which was hysterical because I knew nothing. I mean, I don't even know how we raised that money because I really knew nothing. And so the thought that I had defrauded these money people was pretty funny. So I had to spend a few months shutting the company down because here's the thing, like I could have kept that company going, but because we raised money, all of a sudden you start scaling and you incur all these expenses and it just kills it. It's very hard to like pull back from that. And so it just killed the company. And also I had lost the will to go on after what happened. And so, that all wrapped up around the end of 2000. And then I had another kid, and then it's like 2001 and everything crashes again. Right. And so I had to go out and get a job, and I got the worst job I ever had in my life, which that's a whole other story. but I worked there 6 months. And after that experience, I just decided I am never going to work for anyone else ever again. And so so by then I'm like 35, and I got in touch with a colleague who used to be my assistant when I was in sales at that other startup. And while I was off having babies, he was rising in the ranks of, event marketing at companies like Carlson Marketing and George P. Johnson and Freeman. And so he called me one day. He's like, you got to come down here and help me with this thing for Intel. And I'm like, Intel? I don't know anything about Intel, or I don't even know what they do. And he said, oh, no, it's going to be great. You're going to be great. Just come on down. And so I don't recall the meeting that well, but he put me in front of his boss. And apparently when I left, his boss said, that was the best presentation I've ever seen. And I swear, I think he was thinking of somebody else, because I didn't give a presentation. I just talked to her. But, I took the win, and Paolo, my former colleague, and we started working together, and we were like this unstoppable duo. We, over the course of quite a few years, we worked for PeopleSoft and Cisco and IBM and VMware and AMD and all these companies. And we had a blast, and we were doing basically their big trade show and event strategies. And what I started noticing is that all these tech marketers were struggling because the decision-making power for large tech purchases was moving slowly up the executive chain for two reasons: the size of the deals and the fact that technology was starting to kind of touch every part of the organization. So CFOs and CEOs and CIOs, they wanted to know what the heck was going on, and are we really making the right decision with these tech purchases? Salespeople at tech companies don't know how to talk to those people at the time. They were very intimidated. They were used to talking about speeds and feeds and boxes, and so people started asking me. My clients started asking me, "What do we do?" And so I did a lot of research on that, and then I figured out it's not really anything huge. It's got to be a one-to-one conversation. If you're going to go talk to a C-level person, you better know who they are, who they're connected to, what they've said on their earnings call transcripts, what they're focused on when you go in. And you don't go in and pitch them everything you have. You go in, it's like a surgical operation. They said this, which connects exactly to our solution. They're doing this. We just did that same thing for their competitor, and we can talk about that. So you go in with one compelling nugget of information, or maybe two, and started training marketers and salespeople on that. And then I realized, well, they need the dossiers on these people. And it doesn't sound that hard to do, but it is, because you have to pinpoint what is the hook that's going to help a marketer or a salesperson. So I'm not going to report if the person had like a DEI 5 years ago. I want to know what his business initiatives are. I want to know what his boss is saying about how they're going to allocate budget in the next year, right? So that was the foundation of Boardroom Insiders. And so I continued to consult for a while I refined this approach and put a lot of frameworks and deliverables in front of my clients to see what their reaction would be. And then eventually just built a database and kept those profiles up to date using a team of people. And then years later, I built some software on top of it. I sketched out the software in 2016, but I couldn't afford to build it until 2019. That's what really made the product a lot sexier. A database of executive profiles doesn't sound that great, but if you can say, well, we have a software where if you have 50 people coming to a C-level white glove event, tell us exactly who those people are and we'll profile them for you. And within, a couple minutes, you can figure out how they're all connected, what they all have in common, what their most common business initiatives are. And that's going to help you design a more effective event that resonates with that audience better. You could do something like, put 10 people at a table or your table arrangements and say, hey, y'all, every one of you seated at a table because you have something in common with everyone else at the table. You've got 5 minutes to figure it out. The winning table gets, $5,000 for their charity or, whatever. The fun things like that. So that was it. And then we sold the business in 2022. So it was 14 years of kind of grinding away with very little resources. And we pulled off the sale. And I think the timing was absolutely perfect. honestly, I was having a blast. I didn't really want to stop running the business, but I put everything I had into this business, including most of my money, and I needed financial security. So I needed to sell it. And I think it was a perfect time to sell it. I don't know if we'd be able to pull it off today. Yeah, I guess you just said, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I told you the whole thing. So
No, I love it. That's like the whole scope and trajectory of the conversation. So much to dig into there. So
No, yeah, it's very helpful. You actually made it easier on us because now normally we'd be like, okay, what happened next? Or what'd you start off doing? You start off in journalism or reporting. That's really interesting.
yeah, I mean, I was okay. I don't think I can write well, but I'm not a super talented writer, that I'm going to get into the New York Times. I think in journalism, even at that time, it's you either kind of grind away making very little money and you're not only doing stories, but you're doing like PR and communications on the side. Or, you reach that upper echelon. I just don't think, I didn't want to do the former, and I don't think I'm talented enough to do the latter or willing to work hard enough for it. I wasn't as passionate about it. So, I got out of that, and but it gave me a great foundation for knowing how to communicate.
Oh, yeah, no, for certain. One of my majors was English, so I sympathize with you on the inopportune choice of professions or focus. But this was also like you could say end of the journalist era. I'm not trying to be like too focused on this subject or make a big point or anything, but it's also like a time period where all the big, news companies were firing everybody. So it's good that you like went with the times.
Well, my son is about to graduate from Penn State with a degree in journalism. So, I'll be happy to hear
Hey.
You can do a lot of things with that degree.
For sure.
Like come home and apply to some AI company and, do their fact checking or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to each his own, right? I would still take my English major. I still would, even though, it was like, it's one of the most useless ones. At least I know English. I have a degree in it. Why don't we talk about something more the focus, though, of what we like to talk about? Omeed, I would, some things I'd like to talk about. Let me get your thoughts on this. Or, you had a recent sell your business. So that'd be cool to talk about the process and the experience and for some lessons that other sellers out there might be able to learn from you. That's definitely something I want to talk about. That's it was a SaaS business, I guess. So I want to talk more about the business and, who it served, like what type of finance. Let's see, what are some things you want to talk about?
I think those two directions are perfect. Yeah, tell us a little bit about the business. It sounds like, was the name of the business Boardroom Insiders? Is that correct? Yeah. Tell us about Boardroom Insiders.
It was called Boardroom Insiders. And, it started from this engagement that I had with these marketers, the tech marketers at some of the biggest tech brands in the world. I created it to solve a problem that kept coming up over and over. And, there was about 4 years of just validating that this was indeed a trend that I could build a product around and validating, here's what these profiles look like. We did relationship mapping, and my first official customer for that offering was Scott McNeely, who was the CEO of Sun Microsystems at the time. And this will give you a perfect use case that I created it for. So he was the CEO. I never got to meet him, by the way. I just worked through his team. And they said, Scott has a 200 must-win accounts list that was given to him by his sales leadership. And they are asking that Scott make a personal call to the CIOs, Chief Information Officer of all of these 200 companies. And they were big enterprise companies. And Scott was wise enough to know that even though he was a household name here in the Bay Area, the people over at Procter & Gamble, they didn't know who he was, so he wanted these dossiers. He wanted intelligence on the chief information officers of these 200 companies. And so I was asked to do that. And I thought, this is going to be so easy. I'm like, are you sure? I'm just going to go and get their bio and cut in and paste. And they said, no. We want you, read earnings call transcripts, figure out what the CEO is saying and how that will filter to the CIO and the technology organization. Find out if it's usually a he, if he's connected to Scott in any way through any degrees of separation. So I knew Scott loved hockey and golf, and I knew Scott is very well connected to Jack Welch. He was on the board of GE. And so I knew some people Scott was connected to. And so I would always look for some kind of connection, uncover all the golfers, because Scott had a house in Pebble Beach. And one of the ideas was he would have a golf event at his house and invite the people who were interested in golf. But I would uncover things like people who couldn't stand golf and talked about it. I remember one CIO saying, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to be out on the golf course. He thought it was BS. And so I made sure to put that in, like, don't invite to golf event. There was another CIO who talked extensively about how much he hated jargon, including words like cloud. And this was starting to be the cloud era. And so I put that in, like, don't go in and, use cloud or whatever was the jargon at the time. What was the one? BYOD, bring your own device. So it was that kind of information. And by the way, they were paying me in 2006, I think this was, $1,000 per profile. Pretty good. It was pretty good.
Must have been amazing profiles. It sounds like it was really amazing. Yeah. You put so much information in there. It sounds super valuable.
6 or 7 pages each, business initiatives, business challenges, quotes from interviews, all kinds of stuff, a relationship map to Scott. And my husband was working as a graphic designer, so he was just doing all the design. So it was like me and him. We do 200 of these things, and we get $200,000. I mean, it took a long time. It was a lot of work. And I did hire a few contractors to help me with the research and writing of these profiles. So I had a little operation going, and that's when I thought, why can't I just put these in a database? And I had 2 little kids at the time, so my fantasy was I would put them in a database and just sit in my pajamas and people would buy them offline. Like a salesperson would find it and pay $100 and the money would roll in. It didn't quite happen like that. But that was my idea. And so my husband put them on a website, but they were flat files. It wasn't a database. Like it wasn't a fielded database. It was just like, here's so-and-so's profile. And every time I needed to update it, he'd have to redo the design, upload it again, right? So I was like pretending it was a database, but it wasn't. And people would come across this on the internet. And people would get excited when they'd see it. And I remember this woman from like Lockheed Martin called me one day and she's like, oh my gosh, these are amazing. I need these and I need them by tomorrow. Is there any way? And I thought, well, this is interesting. So I stayed up all night and I did her profiles and my husband did them. And I'm like, yeah, here they are. And she said, can I give you my firstborn? So, any opportunity I got to, because this was going up to her CEO. And the thought, like, my brand would get in front of the CEO of Lockheed Martin, I was just like, I don't care what it takes. For sure. That's a big deal. It was chaos, but it was fun. I mean, I was having fun and I was excited because it's like, wow, this is getting attention. And so then the next step was like, I need to build a genuine database of these things. So I talked to a bunch of people about how to do it. It was going to be expensive. I was still consulting to make money. And I didn't have any seed capital to build the database. And so my husband had a friend who he worked for a while who hit it big with an exit with kind of a company. It was called Hotkeys. And that was a really interesting company. But all of a sudden he's rich and I'm talking to him about what I want to do. And he's like, wait a minute, Scott McNeely paid you $1,000 each for these things. And I said, yeah, now I want to put them in a database and grow it. And he's like, my gosh, even if you got $100 each and you were selling them, that's a lot of money. So we agreed. And I said, well, I got to build the database. He said, I'll write you a check for $125,000. I want 10% of the company and I want 10% of the company forever. So if you take any more money, like let me know and I'll put more in. And so that's how it started. And so I built the first generation database. And a couple years after that, I was getting a little bit of traction, but really not going anywhere. And part of that was because I was way ahead of the market. Besides Cisco, Sun, a bunch of big tech companies, the little ones, they didn't know what I was talking about. C-suite selling, what's that? Why do we have to sell into the C-suite? So that was one issue with the business early on. But I just felt like I wasn't getting enough traction and I was dabbling and I was using it as a tool for my consulting, which was all well and good. But I really just wanted to build a product and get out of consulting. I was tired of my income being tied to my hours because I could see I'm the kind of person who I will work until I drop because I see opportunity. I'm like, oh, I want to make more money. I just can't control myself. So that's not a good thing for me. So I'm like, I want to shift to make a product. I want to be like a genuine software entrepreneur. I don't even think SaaS was in my vocabulary yet at that time. And so I decided that if I was going to be able to do that, I needed help. And so August of 2009, I just said, because I'm an introvert, and I said, I'm going to just make a phone call every day to someone who I think needs to know about this and who can help me. So I did it. Every day I made a phone call. And if I skipped a day, I made 2 the next day. And it just kept like the multiplier effect. It just kept going on, referred to the next person, to the next person, to the next person. And through those phone calls, I got a business partner, which I didn't even know I needed one, but I found the perfect business partner. I found an amazing vendor that I worked with for 14 years that actually made our business model work. Otherwise, I don't know if we would have made it work. And then I just found a lot of fans. And it was never the first person I talked to. It was like the second or third person that they referred me onto. So everybody I met that actually got involved in the business was completely net new to me. And so when people ask, like, well, how do I get, I'm like, just start making phone calls, cold call people, because if it's their industry or adjacent, they're probably going to want to talk to you. And if they don't want to talk to you, what have you got to lose? Just try. And I really actually enjoyed it. I don't like picking up the phone, but the conversations were fantastic, and I became inspired, and I met wonderful people who helped me. And so that's something I always recommend that people do.
Love that. Yeah, great advice. Great momentum builder. Just taking action.
Yeah.
So wait, you're still an introvert after all of that?
Right?
Not a rhetorical question, a real question.
I love talking about stuff like this. Okay. I could talk for 8 hours straight about it. And I have. But I don't like small talk. I don't like to go, I go to parties and stuff, but I feel like when I started this company and started connecting with entrepreneurs, I found my people. I feel like I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't participate in the whole Ivy League to Silicon Valley pipeline. And since I live here, you really feel that when you live here and you're not a part of it. You just feel like you're on the outside looking in, and even with my deal, it's like, 25 million. Oh, I'm sorry. No one said that to me, but I can see it in their eyes.
That's funny.
And, even in my neighborhood, I go down to the corner cafe and everyone's talking about deals and millions this and billion and unicorn, blah, blah, blah. So I think I'm in this bubble where I just don't. It's taken me like 2 years to realize that I did really well in this deal. I was always happy with it, but I knew so little that I didn't know the value in all cash deal, even though it's a lower valuation. A while to realize that. And it took me a while to realize, and I think putting the figures out there, it's only like in the last couple of weeks, seeing what VCs and other entrepreneurs are saying about my deal. Since I put all the numbers out, I'm like, oh, there are people who raise money and have much bigger valuations and sell their company, and they end up with less than I did.
I can't wait to, let's get to that in a moment too. I want to hear, what was, first of all, just while we're on the subject, what was well, okay, I'm trying to, just tell me what the revenue was of the 1 or 2 years before it sold. I'm not sure.
So we were at about 5 million in ARR.
Okay.
That's some other revenue, but it was like, they don't count it towards ARR.
What was the margin in the accounts, though not counting for like money you might have paid out for yourself, but what was just the profits on the accounts?
Approximately.
Yeah, I should probably know that, but I really don't. I'll
ballpark it.
My partner was, well,
that's fine.
It's very profitable.
Oh, okay. So that's very important. Do you think it was over 25%? Very profitable.
It's like a flywheel effect. Once you've built your box of data, and for us, that was the Fortune 500 top 5 execs. That was a challenge early on in our business, is I had everybody that Scott McNealy wanted, and then a bunch of other ones that Cisco wanted, and a bunch of other ones that VMware wanted. But I didn't, when someone would say, what's in your database? It's like, well, we have, some Fortune 500 CIOs, and we have some CEOs too. You can't sell that. You've got to be able to tell somebody, what's your data set? And I didn't even realize that when I started. And it was when I brought my partner on, and he had worked for Dun & Bradstreet. He had worked for a sold to Dun & Bradstreet, so he was in the data business for several years before he joined me. And so I was completely outside that world. So it was good to bring him in because he had sold that.
I don't know. The more you tell me about the business, not only do I want to learn more about it, but also my mind is actually leaning towards like that. What am I trying to say here? That it sounds like the valuation was pretty good, actually. I mean, in other words, I don't know. I'm just kind of assuming some numbers in my head as to what the profit, the take home was, the margin was. But maybe if it was like an 8x multiple on the profit at 25 million, I don't see it. In other words, I don't see that as being like, oh my gosh, that's such a great deal. I'm trying to say it sounds like a good deal. I'm trying to scope, because if it was like 1 million in revenue, and you got 25 million, then I'd be like, that's a crazy deal. What happened?
Yeah. Well, so here are all the different factors. At the time, the multiples were really high. And that's one reason we started exploring hiring an M&A banker, because, the multiples have always been impressive for, since the market recovered back in like 2012 or whenever it really recovered. But after the pandemic in 2021, there was an explosion of deals because there was pent up money to do these deals. Mm-hmm. And they actually started looking down market at smaller companies, because I had been talking to PE firms and bankers and potential acquirers for a while. And so had my partner. And we kept hearing like, get to 5 million. And then when we were close to 5 million, we thought like we're in about a year, it was like, oh, you need to get to 10. And so at that point, we're like, forget it. Like, let's just put our heads down and run the business. Things are going really well, which things were going very well. Mm-hmm. We were very profitable. We had just kind of reached this great, pandemic helped us, because if you think about our use case, like instead of flying all day to see a customer, you could have a CEO in their house talking to 10 customers in a day and other CEOs. And they were all trying to figure out how not to collapse under COVID. Like they wanted to talk to their suppliers and their partners. And so they really needed these profiles to know who they were talking to. And so we did very well. We doubled in size during the pandemic. So the multiples, companies were starting to look down market for smaller companies to acquire. And we're seeing multiples like 7 to 12, 8 times ARR. And that's really what we were looking at. That's why I wasn't so focused on, how profitable were we? Because that was like my partner's department to worry about that. But my eye was like, what's the ARR? What is it? Because that's what our valuation was going to be based off of.
Okay. In that circumstance.
And then the second, so we got 5.5. And so I thought, well, that's not very good. Like, what about, I want the 7, But here's the thing. We were bought by a public British company.
Oh, okay.
They're not frothy people, That's not happening. They're not going to be overpaying or saying, I just really want it. So they had to really justify the valuation, and they had bought 4 companies before us. Mm-hmm. And I can talk about this because it's all public information. They used to be a public company. Now they're not, but they basically acquired 5 brands in the people intelligence space. Mm. And we were the last one. And what they told us is like your software product, that overlaid product that I talked about earlier, they said, this is going to help us bring everything together. Mm-hmm. So just to wrap that up, for all 4 of the other acquisitions they did were for 2 times revenue or less. So we did pretty well for being acquired by a public British company.
Mm-hmm. So just to clarify a couple things, you sold the company 2 years ago, you said, or when was the company?
It closed January 22.
Okay. 22. And to clarify, the multiple that you sold, it sounds like you sold for 25. You were at 5.5, so it sold at like a 6.5.
We were at just
at 5,
a hair,
5x.
5 million ARR, so it was 5.5.
Yeah, 5.5. And so it sounds like there were kind of 2 components to Boardroom Insiders. There was a database component that sounds somewhat similar to like a Crunchbase, for example. And then there was a software component. And interestingly enough, it sounds like the acquirer was really interested in the software component. That was the overlay.
I think so. Mm-hmm. I think so. That's what they told us. And I think our growth would have been slower. And I don't know if we would have had that deal without that software product. We probably wouldn't have. That was a real game changer for us. And I knew exactly what it needed to be back in 2016, but I couldn't build it until 2019. I mean, I sketched it out on a giant Post-its and showed it to my partner because he gave me the seed of the idea. He said, Sharon, nobody else is bringing together the data that we are all in one place. Like one place has contact information. Another place might report on the company. Another place might, then there are articles about their hobbies and all these things. We brought it all together in one place. So he said, you're the only ones that have all of this stuff together. So what else can we do with it? And I'm like, well, we could figure out how everyone's connected. And we were already doing this as custom work. So a customer would come to us, and this was like a bone of contention between me and my partner for quite a while, because he would say, well, SAP wants to, map these 50 executives to each other, or, they want to, all they care about are these 300 people, and they want to kind of a global view of those 300 as a group, as a data set. And I'd be like, well, I can do that. I know exactly how to do it. And it was painstaking work to do that manually. And we would charge like 50 grand to do one report on 200 people. And it would take me about 4 weeks to do it. And I would do it myself. And he didn't like that because it ate up all my time, but I loved doing it. And there's no way I was turning down 50 grand in those early days. No, probably never. I would never turn down 50 grand.
I like that.
I mean,
I hear you. I'm the same thing.
It's like, how much? Bring it in. I'll do it. And so
it's so interesting. So interesting. I actually see your investigative journalism background applying in all of these endeavors. I mean, you were building a newsletter before. You were literally collecting and compiling data and information on people. And you actually very much applied your investigative your journalism background in these endeavors. But please continue. I didn't mean to cut you off.
So anyway, he'd say, we got to get away from this because it does nothing for our ARR. That's why we're such great partners, because I'm like, I'm going to scramble and just get the shit done so that we can get the money and so that we can get more exposure. Because I just always thought if someone sees how brilliant these reports are, they're just going to want more and more. And so the problem was we would have people who were not subscribers to our database, but they wanted the report. So he was saying they shouldn't get the report. They shouldn't even get the privilege of giving us that 50 grand for that special report because they're not subscribers. And I would say, but when they see this stuff, they're going to want to be subscribers. So I thought we could use the report as a way to sell them into the database. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes they did just want the report and then they went away. But what we did was there was the first obstacle is we were both non-technical founders. So I knew what the software needed to do. I sketched it all out. But not only did we not have the money, we didn't have the right partner, because for years we had been maintaining our technology and our increasingly brittle website and database with one guy out of Austin. Lovely guy. It was all in PHP. But then along comes Ruby on Rails and all this other technology. That's about as much as I know about it, the name of it. And, you couldn't do a lot to update our site. We had to completely rebuild it. And so we started off with one agency and we actually got a good deliverable out of them, but it was a nightmare. Such a nightmare that I think we were supposed to pay $40,000 and they only charged us $13,000 because it was just a terrible process. And we got no project management or testing. We had to do it all ourselves. And so we parted ways with them. And then we found another technology partner and they were amazing. And they rebuilt the whole site and they added a bunch of nice things to it. The filtered search was wonderful and everybody loved it. And so once we had them in place, I was like, they could build this.
And what was the layered software? Have you described what the actual software did that you layered on top of this database?
Yeah. Well, so we had this underlying profile database and everything was fielded, so there's a field for each hobby, for example, and that was really important. Every organization they had ever been associated with, whether it's alma mater, boards, past employers, those were all fielded out so that, and we had date ranges too, which was really important, so that we could relationship map. So the tool basically had 4 components. The first was you could create a group of real people. It's like a persona really, but it's based on real people. in real roles. So you could go in and say, okay, I care about these 250 chief information officers. And you, as a user, you would form a group of those 250 people. And then you hit a button and it generates these dashboards. And the first dashboard had top 5 languages spoken, top 5 organizations they've ever been associated with in their entire careers, top 5 hobbies, relationship map them against each other. And then you could toggle a switch. And depending on what company you were at, it would map those 250 against your own executives that we had in the database. The relationship mapping piece was really powerful because it would map the relationship of those 250 people against each other. And then you could hit a toggle, a little switch, and then it would map those 250 against your company's own executives. So if I work at Salesforce and, there are 150 profiles of my executives in this database too, I can map these 250 must-win customer CIOs against my own Salesforce executives. And so, for example, there are lots of great examples of what this looked like. I mean, sometimes there was not a lot to look at, but there was one example where I forget, it was Salesforce and some other company, and there were 2 women executives. They both were multilingual. They both had similar hobbies. They both were in the Peace Corps, Mali, 1 year apart. And I mean, if that's not an amazing conversation starter, you could just tell these women were going to hit it off, you guys have to meet. And we would do little marketing pieces like that. These women have to meet. And so you could pinpoint little things like that. And then we would, there was always going to be a custom component to work, because then once we launched the software, that was a huge hit, but then they still wanted us to do stuff for them. Some were afraid to use the software, even though it was the easiest thing in the world. It had to be, because I don't like to read instructions or go through training. I just like to use it. So it was meant for someone like me, but they were still afraid of it. And so, here they are subscribing to this product, and they would still say, you know what, could you just create all these groups for us and run the thing and give us the deliverables? And I'm like, do you realize you can do this yourself in 5 minutes? Yeah, but we want you to do it. And then they'd look at it and they'd say, oh gosh, could you do a sliver of insight for just the people in Japan, or just the people in ANZ, Australia, New Zealand? Or we want one that shows everybody, but then we want one that's just oil and gas. And I mean, we could slice and dice this by industry, by region, by role, all kinds of things. And so, we would do it for them. And this is where we were at the time we sold. So at the time we sold, and one reason I was like, I wish I could still be running that, is because I was coming up with a services offering for marketers who either wanted us to provide that support, or the next step was okay, now we've got all this great info. What do we do with it? So we would create decks you could have an event like this, and you could do these types of things at the event. You could, the table seating that I was talking about earlier. You creative things. If you know a lot about your audience, you could have a big dashboard on the wall, a digital dashboard that shows how they're all connected. I mean, it would blow people away.
Sounds awesome.
So I was super excited about that. Plus, I had all these young kids working for me. They were just awesome. They were the ones doing the profiles. We didn't do data scraping. It was just all of them pulling it together. And we built our system so that it was super efficient, so they could drag and drop and reuse content. And all the earnings call transcripts were embedded in the back end of our tools, so they could just see when there was a new one and click in and, go into it and grab what they needed. But, they're like this for 8 hours a day, every day. And I thought, I need a path for these kids, they're going to get sick of doing this. And so one of my ideas was, they had such amazing business acumen, tremendous to read a 10-page earnings call transcript and know exactly what the relevant piece was to pull out and why. And so I was planning on turning them all into consultants, client-facing consultants, as they moved up in the organization, because then they could do what I did. I was the one who would go to the client and say, look at this is what you can do, blah, blah, blah. So I was excited about training this army of consultants, but it was not to come to pass.
I love how that's come out of this story too. The deal was good. Really cool business, and Omeed and I are frothing at the lips or something like that. Oh, this is really cool business. Oh, I could feel that, and also you had still so much more cool stuff to do. I feel like this is a great story.
You're a great storyteller.
In so many different ways.
Oh, thank you. No, I mean, I loved it. I just thought it was a blast. Now, I worked out of San Francisco most of the time, so I was not managing a day-to-day office. My partner was doing that, even though my team reported to me the content and product side of the business. But, and then we went through COVID, but that was not that big of a deal for us because we were digitally native as a company because he lived in South Carolina and I lived out here. So we had to be from the beginning. So that wasn't that big of an adjustment.
I'd love to talk about the deal. If we can kind of dig our hands into the specifics of the deal. So we've talked a little bit about the deal. The way I found you, Sharon, was you went viral because you've, really brought total transparency to the finances aspect of the deal in terms of digging into the numbers, how much you took, how you saved on taxes, kind of those things that are a little taboo about to talk about publicly. But I'd love, just for the audience as well to just touch on that a little bit about, and then tell us what that deal process was like. I hear that you got about a 5.5x multiple, for example, on 5 million ARR. One of the questions we always get is, what are multiples? How do I hit this multiple? What did that conversation with the acquirer about the multiple sound like? So those are a few things that I'd love to touch on.
Yeah. Well, there's the process and then there's the deal. And I think of them kind of as two separate things. To me, the deal, it's very straightforward, which is the beauty of it. It was 100% cash, 25 million, all the deal fees. You pay your deal fees, about $1 million to the banker, $200,000 to the lawyers, $51,000 to the accountants. And then we knew we wanted to sell someday, but it was really end of 2020, 2021, where we were starting to get all this outreach, even though we felt like we're having our heads down now. We even hired a VP of operations in June of 2021. So that's how we really thought, this isn't going to happen in the next year, right? But thank God.
This is actually, sorry to cut you off, but this is actually what I was going to ask next. You're hitting on how it all came about. So please go on.
Yeah. So, we doubled in size during COVID to the point where we didn't have office enough for everybody. So we had this hybrid schedule and we were mixing teams, each team had their own day in the office and then we mixed teams their second day. So it was 2 days in the office for everybody. And we hired a VP of operations because my partner and I were drowning in stuff that we were either not good at or didn't want to do or both. So for example, for me, I was on the GDPR privacy regulation beat and I'm not qualified to do it. I find it tedious and boring, but very important. And so, and then there were things like who's ordering the office snacks and who's going to find us new office space because we had outgrown the office. So we had this mishmash of stuff that we needed done. And so my partner found this guy through his network, Tony Marsters, who's amazing. And he flew in to meet with us. And it's we didn't know if we wanted someone just to order snacks or do more, right? Tony, he can order snacks, but he could just do so much more. And he was so smart and just talking way over my head that I had to listen so hard all day. And by the end of the day, we were just exhausted by this guy, but in a good way. And I told my partner, I said, I can't unhear all of that. I said, I want to do everything that he talks about. And so I think we need him. If we don't get him and we just hire someone to order snacks, I'm going to be disappointed because I want someone to do all that other stuff. And he was talking about, you need to form a leadership team. You need to start pushing some of your responsibilities down. And if those people aren't ready, you need to train them up and you need to get them doing their own department budgets. And then you need to work together as a team. I have a process where every quarter, you're going to focus on 3 strategic initiatives and they can only be things that touch every part of the company. So he knew what he was doing. He got us really excited. We hired him. And my point in telling you this is I don't think we would have hired him had we known we were going to sell in about 6 months and it's feeding time soon. And so, we really did have our heads down. And so I think we were interviewing him in April. And while I was out there for that interview, we got a call from a PE firm that we had spoken to a few times and had seen our financials before. We had an NDA with them that they had kind of rejected us. They'll say go away for 6 months and then we'll talk again. So they called and I told them, I'm like, we're really having fun over here. We've got our heads down. We're doing really well. I don't think we're interested in continuing these discussions. And he said, what? Well, we can give you a term sheet for $48 million today. And I was like, what? And so I hung up the phone and I said to Lee, my partner, I said, I think we need to at least have a discussion about this. And he's like, well, call Michael. So Michael was the guy who wrote me that original $125,000 check, who is now a public company CEO. He's amazing. He's a very successful serial entrepreneur, total goofball. Even though he's like up here, he still is like, okay, what's going on? Like he wants to talk to me and find out what's going on because he loves the deal, right? Mm-hmm. I sneak out in the hallway so no employees will hear. And I call him and I'm like, listen to this. We got this. They're going to give us a term sheet. And he's like, Sharon, they're full of shit. He's like,
yes.
And it's like, they're going to throw out some stupid number and then, get you all excited and you're going to be spending the money already. And then they're going to start chipping away and chip away and chip away. And they're going to get you down to 20, and then you're going to be so exhausted, you'll just take it. He's like, why are you doing this? And I said, well, because someone threw out a number and I've never heard a number before. And he said, if you are serious about selling now, go hire an M&A banker. So I said, okay. Goodbye. Ran into Lee. I'm like, what?
This guy's
banker?
Such a good advisor.
This guy's a great investor. And
I'm going to make this guy famous.
What a cool
He
guy.
is amazing. I love him. So I'm writing a book and he's going to be in it. So I go to Lee because Lee comes from a commercial banking background. And here's the thing, like women, I don't know, we just don't learn this stuff. And men are like, just, they just talk about it when they go out. All of my women friends here in the Bay Area, they're all like in healthcare or nonprofits or education. They have no idea what I'm talking about. And I have nobody to talk to. Like I had no peers in my off time to just be like, blah, 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 blah. But that's how he was. So he knew more than me, but he was great because he never looked at me like I was an idiot. He never talked down to me. He would get excited. Okay, let me tell you all about it. So I said, what's an M&A banker? And he's like, an M&A banker is like a realtor for your business. A realtor comes into your home. They look at it. They tell you what's wrong with it. They help you fix it up if you need help. And then they set a price and then they go find buyers and then they pit them against each other so you all can get the best deal and then they get a flat percentage. Same exact thing for an M&A banker, except they're selling your company. The numbers are a lot bigger, hopefully. And that's how it works. So once he told me that, I thought, I understand that. And so Lee always had a guy in his neighborhood for everything. Guy in my neighborhood.
He's like, oh, my neighbor.
Yeah, I don't have that. And so he's like, oh, the guy in my neighborhood said we should call up and get this right. Morris, Manning, and Martin, a law firm in Atlanta. And so we talked to Morris, Manning, and Martin because he said they do this paperwork review to make sure you're ready so you don't kind of embarrass yourself to your banker. I mean, you want your banker to think you're on top of stuff. And so we kind of went about it in an interesting way that I think really benefited us. We talked to Morris, Manning, and Martin first. They said, great, we'll do this paperwork review for you for free with the understanding that if you do a deal, you'll use us as your attorneys. Fine. So they're all doing the paperwork. Oh, we said, well, who can you recommend that we should look at for bankers? Because they know who sucks and who's good because they work with them all the time and they know the deal sizes. And so they said, okay, they gave us 3 possibilities. And then we heard 2 other referrals from somewhere. So and Lee told me, he's like, you have the most to win and to lose, to gain and to lose. So you need to run this whole thing, even though he technically knows more about it. But I think it worked out great because I didn't know much. I was very inquisitive. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean by this? How does this work? So we interviewed all the bankers. 2 declined to continue because they were too busy or the deal wasn't right. And so then we had 3 in the pool who wanted to pitch us. And they gave us their pitch, and then I asked for a bunch of references. I wanted people who had sold their business successfully using these firms within the past 2 years, and I wanted similar size deals and industry. So I spent a solid week just talking to entrepreneurs.
Side note.
Hours. Yeah.
How much did you want to sell your company for? What was the number that you had in mind?
Well, we had a spreadsheet for quite some time. With all these different valuations across the top, and then it would automatically calculate tax for both of us, the fees for the bankers, lawyers, accountants, and then we had
that's a great lead magnet for other people. Like, hey, here's a calculator that will help you understand. Yeah. Anyway,
it was a it was a calculator, and then we did phantom equity for employees eventually. So then we had that. as a line item. And then it was like his cut and my cut, our taxes, and then the end number. And that was a great education for me because I was like, oh, you could sell for a pretty high number, but you may not get, if you don't have the right evaluation, you may not get what you really need to, if you want to retire. And so we would look at that thing all the time. Sometimes I would just like in the middle of the night, I'd open it and I'd just be like, it went like 15, 20, 25, 30. Like it went all the way up to 50, which is kind of
so when you heard that 48 number, that's why you got excited, because it sounds like the number went up to 50.
Yes, but I didn't really get the different types of deals. A PE deal is very different. I mean, the valuations are typically higher, but a lot of it is stuff you may never get, right? You may never see. And you typically have to run the company for a few more years, and it's not in the carefree, autonomous way you did before. You've got a knee in your back, right?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, though, because it's like, you took all cash, but you had all these like really great visions of what you wanted to create. And there's almost a conversation to have there in terms of, with an earnout, potentially you would have maybe not made as much on the front end, but you did want to continue with these visions that you had. So there is for sure a conversation to have there. What were you going to say, Joe?
Or not even an earnout, but just like
out
and like retaining.
Well, the hilarious thing is the firm who threw out that number that started this whole thing happening. When they produce their prospect list, one of the things they ask you is, give us the names of anyone you've ever talked to before, and we'll put them on the list. So I gave them the name of that PE firm, and they declined.
That is so funny.
It was so funny.
This is such a good lesson.
Why did they decline?
They were pissed off at me because that day when I talked to Michael after I talked to them, and then they called back like a week later, and I said, we're just going to run a process. So I'll let you know when we've chosen our banker. And they were pissed. They were just like, how rude. I mean, this is business, right? Of course I want to get the best deal for myself. So they declined. And I thought that was very funny.
Interesting.
Because they got it started to the first, declined. Right.
Yeah, right.
I didn't even want to look at our deck.
Yeah. So, there's definitely really good, sorry to hijack the conversation real quick, but there's definitely really good lessons there for other people about being wary of the process. You definitely made the right decision. Other people need to do the same thing as to go hire the real estate broker of selling your business, an M&A banker, investment banker. Definitely everything you did was like playbook correct from, again, we're M&A lawyers, right? We've been doing this for a long time. So I just want to emphasize that's what other people need to do. And remember also, people need to be wary. I'm not going to comment too much about that specific buyer. I could ask some more questions. We'll kind of leave them in the bucket of maybe we're trying to screw you over. That's where we left them off at in the story. But in reality, when you go down the process with one person, with one potential buyer, it's just not how it works, I guess is the way I'll say it. It's kind of like when you sell your house with a lot of buyers. You're the one in control. But if you were to sell your house and like one guy came over and said it's him, now you're just dealing with one person, and that whole dynamic is totally different.
Yeah.
He might come back and say, hey, well, can you hold the mortgage? It's like, hey, God, well, the deal is not what it's supposed to be. So when you're able to drive the process like you did, you're definitely able to command the best terms and pick people. And actually, why don't we talk about that too? You talked about what it was like to select the banker, but how about the buyer process? And we don't need to know like all the buyers or anything, but just like the lessons you learned and how it worked successfully for you so other people can take learning from.
Well, I always wanted a strategic buyer versus a PE firm. I just thought it would be cleaner and a better home for our team and our product, which I cared about. It wasn't just about the money for me. I mean, the money was great. Don't get me wrong. But we had built such an amazing team, and I wanted them to land in a good place. And they did. It's been great for them. Most of them are still there, and it's a global company with 5 products and lots of resources. So they have more opportunity. They could move between brands. They could move to other geos. It's just a lot more opportunity than they had under our little bootstrapped operation. So that was the first thing. So I was glad that, we had a viable offer from a strategic buyer, and they were familiar to me. They had bought a company called BoardX pretty much all the companies that have been in our orbit for years and years and years now live under their brand. So, and the people intelligence space, the non-self-reported kind, LinkedIn is one thing because it's self-reported profiles. Nobody wanted to really touch it. There was this perceived liability issue related to GDPR at first, and then the California regulation, they're all going to come. So, I talked to Hoover's one time, Hoover's D&B, and they're like, yeah, we thought of doing executive profiles, but we just don't want to touch it from a liability standpoint. So nobody was really doing what we were doing. And so I like that the product found a home with the other products that were doing similar things. 2 of the products they have are specifically for nonprofits, for like donor development. So it's like rich people databases. And I'm sure there's some overlap between rich people database and executive database. But then 3 of the products were more focused on corporate leaders, corporate decision makers. So I really liked where it ended up. Yeah.
Sense.
And
so you really liked this one buyer. Did you say no to a bunch of other people and really focus on them from the get-go? Did it take a while or I guess it was such a quick process for you?
It was really quick.
Did it take a moment to find that buyer? How did you guys find that buyer?
Well, they were one of the ones on our list that we gave to Leonis Capital. They're like, we've talked to these guys before. They're in our space. They bought pretty much everyone else in the space already. We're like the only one left hanging out there. And so it made a lot of sense that they would be the buyer. And we talked to, a few other companies that were also strategic buyers as well. But this just ended up being the best home for us. And it was just such a clean deal, although, I asked for 50% more than they offered initially. And this is an important point. And this is no disrespect to my banker. I loved our bankers and they did a great job for us. But it was 2021, at the end of 2021, and I think our offers were coming in November, and they were swamped with other deals. I knew they were because I could see reference to it, when people were talking like, oh yeah, we got this other one going on and blah, blah, blah. And at one point I heard that they were working on a $120 million deal. I thought, oh no, we're little compared to that. And I felt like in a perfect world, we would have gotten the offer and we'd just been like, fine. Because from 20 to 25 is not that big of a difference in terms of what they would make. It's a huge difference to us, especially when I own 57% of the company. Huge. So once again, I call my friend Michael and I say, Michael, we've got this offer. And I'm like, it's just not enough. It's not enough. I'd have to go get a job elsewhere. Why would I do that? And he said, Sharon, what do you want? And I said, I want 30 million.
Love this guy.
He's like, then go ask for it. Go get out there and ask for it. I was like, okay. Okay, Michael. And so I was very intentional in what I did next. I wrote Robert Coven, our banker, an email. And I put it in writing because I wanted him to tell the buyer exactly what I put in the email. Because remember, I told you earlier that at one point they had said, your platform is the thing that's going to allow us to bring all this stuff together. And so what I wrote is like, if we're the platform that's going to bring everything together, you should be willing to pay 30 million. This is what we want. And so we ended up at 25. And I was grumbling about that too. I was bitching about it. And I talked to my accountant. He's like, are you crazy? He's like, take it, go, be happy, live your life. Just take it. And so we did. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know that all cash was good. I thought maybe it would be better if we did a PE deal and then I could, run it for a few more years and then maybe have a second bite at the apple, as they say, and maybe even a third. I had these big plans, and it wasn't until after the deal was done and I had a few months to sit with it and everything started crashing, tech was crashing. And I was like, there's the war. We had a development team in Russia. They all had to flee to Istanbul a month later. So it's like, oh, thank God. AI's coming in. AI is going to write all our profile. It's just like, thank God. The timing was perfect. Would I have liked to do it, for longer? Yes. I would. Even I thought, well, I wish they kept me and, I could keep running it. No, I would have left in 2 days because they switched over to Microsoft 365 from Google Docs. They switched over to Facebook Business from Slack. I was like, oh, no. I can't use funky technology.
I want to break a bit of this down because
So many good
nuggets here that are coming out about this story, and it's just so helpful. I could see this just being so educational for a first-time seller. Here's a few things I want to break down here is, and let's just talk again, I guess right now we're at the stage of talking about the deal terms. I have so many other questions, just remnant from prior segments of the conversation, but talking about the terms and it being all cash and all these changes coming up that were to affect that business. That's definitely a huge deal, right? It's kind of like, you're the leader, you're still going to have to do the job and you're still going to have to bear the brunt, and then you don't own as much, and so you're going to be less motivated to do that. That's definitely a huge thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I never even really thought of that, but that's true.
Yeah, if you only have like 10% or something at that point, right? And it's like, okay, I'm doing all of this just to make that 10% worth more. There's that. Some people, there's a lot of different ways to look at it though. Some people will have like retained 20% and they won't have very many responsibilities. They'll kind of like go into retiree mode. So I want to show other people out there don't think the only option is all cash, or I run the whole business and, bear all of this risk. That can definitely be balanced. I love though how you also call out the AI thing, that trend. So, that's definitely a huge case. I don't know that space, but there's probably several other businesses in AI in that space, right?
Yeah, there are. And we would have figured it out. I would have taken charge of that. I'm fascinated by it. I'm learning about it now just because I'm interested, but we would have figured it out, but it would have been a pain, it would have been when you're bootstrapping, everything's so heavy on you, it's like entrepreneurship is hard no matter what. But when you're bootstrapping, it's extra hard, and there's just not a lot of margin for problems or errors. And, once we actually we didn't hire our first employees for like 6 years. So it was just me and my partner and a bunch of contractors. And one contractor we had, she was with us from the beginning, and then she actually led the editorial team, and she's still at the company, which is great. But once you have employees and you're growing, and then, your monthly spend just balloons, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, and you've got to keep it coming in. You don't have much of a cushion. I took out a personal line of credit for the business at some point to just keep it, have that little cushion, because sometimes people don't pay you for like 3 months and it's stressful. So I don't know if we could have successfully weathered all of the, the tech downturn, because our customers were heavily concentrated in tech. The disruption of the development team having to scatter out of Russia. We maybe could have made it through, but it would have been exhausting, and we were already kind of exhausted.
That's another thing. I feel like you got out of it before you hit that full-on founder fatigue, who's like, now you're like really want to sell. And that's where a lot of people end up selling at. And then that's probably part of what you've heard is like, you got a really great deal for the timing, but a lot of people like miss the timing and then they're fatigued, and now they're getting same deal. It could have been 12. 15.
Well, we were afraid of that because we were tired after COVID just made everything harder. And Tony came in and made everything easier. And when we did put together that leadership team, after he came on board, it was fantastic. We did make it through 2 quarters of strategic initiatives, so 6 strategic initiatives that we were completing while we were actually had the deal in progress. The leadership team knew about the process, but nobody else did. And we just kept going. And, we told our team, like, we need to just keep going as if this is not happening, because it may not happen. Michael told me, he's like, 50% chance this isn't happening. He told me that day one. He's like, this, probably won't happen, Sharon. So don't spend any money. Don't take your eye off the ball with the business. Just keep going. So that's what I told our team. Look, this may not happen. Anything could happen. We can't stop. We have to keep. So, when we were closing the deal, we were launching our initiatives for the first quarter of 23. We had them all defined and who was doing what. And we kept going even into January on those. But And here's the beautiful byproduct of doing what we did in those last 2 quarters, putting together the leadership team, turning all departmental budgets over to those leaders, and really talking about training them to budget with our fractional CFO, who was really important. And I thought, gosh, what would it have looked like if we were acquired? They kick me and Lee out, and then those people have to step in, and all of a sudden they're running everything, and they haven't been empowered and trained to do that. It wouldn't look very good. So I feel like what we did was, it was perfect from a timing perspective, because We spent 6 months empowering our department leaders. Before it was like, Lee runs sales and marketing and finance, and I run product and editorial. No, by the end of that 6 months, the only thing that was being run by either of us was sales. Lee was running sales and I wasn't running anything. So it's like pushing everyone out of the nest. They can fly. They know what they're doing. They look great to the buyer. Like they can make a great impression. And so, maybe that's why they're all still there.
And what's interesting is it sounds like you got exit ready before you even knew that you were going to exit.
Lee was always focused on the exit from the time he joined the company. That's why we fought for custom projects, because he's like ARR. And, so, I am not a paperwork person. I hate paperwork. I will do everything I'll write a 30-page PowerPoint deck before I do a form. Like Isaac, from day one, he's like, Sharon, where's your paperwork? Where is it? Give it to me. Bring it here to South Carolina for safekeeping. Because he knew I wasn't, organized. Get a lawyer, did a corporate book, did a shareholders agreement. What happens if one of us gets hit by a bus? We did all that stuff. We did state tax, which is becoming a big deal at the time for internet companies. We got to figure out our state tax. They'd be like, but he made sure we did it. And it came up. It came up in the buying process. We didn't pay our state tax and we didn't have that figured out. Maybe they would have, lopped off $1 million or something. That's the kind of stuff I guess they're looking for. You know better than me. And but for me, it just made the deal pretty easy to do from a due diligence standpoint. And all the entrepreneurs I talked to when I interviewed them for references, they were just having PTSD about their due diligence. They said, it's terrible, it's horrendous, it's awful, you die. And I didn't find it that bad. I didn't think it was that bad because I knew where our documents were. We weren't a super complicated capital structure. We didn't have a lot of the stuff that a big company deal would have because we were so small. We didn't have any lawsuits or, anything complicated. And so I was able to turn over all the documents and it was relatively painless until the very end when things get really, really crazy.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
What was crazy? Yeah, what was crazy? And I want to call out there. One thing I wanted to mention earlier is, first of all, I really appreciate, you emphasizing having the documents be ready. I really like how you guys just coincidentally, or then again, at the behest of your partner, we're getting these other executives in place because that totally changed the dynamics of an acquisition. The business does need to be able to continue on without you having control. And oh gosh, I forgot the third thing I was going to say. So let's bring it back to the present now. What got crazy?
There were tears, there was screaming. It was. Well, I went back to South Carolina because we were going to close and I wanted to be there. There became like this, it was, still COVID-y. So we would work in the office until 10 o'clock at night and we'd get out to go get food and everything's closed because, everything kind of like went like this after COVID. So we were eating poorly and we're both like healthy people. Like we work out and we usually eat properly. So we weren't exercising. We weren't eating right. Last part of the due diligence, it's like everyone's asking you for stuff you've provided 10 different times and they want it again. And it's already been like that for a while, but I'm getting pretty fed up that I've provided this. And then they started saying, well, now we want it, but we want it in a different format. So I'd have to sit there doing a spreadsheet with pulling things around and I was irritated. So, we were not feeling great because we're not eating well, exercising, we're working around the clock.
It's a stressful process.
And it was stressful. And then it coincided with something else I was doing at a nonprofit. Like it just all dovetailed literally on the same day, like on the same day we were supposed to close. And on that same night, I had to, as co-chair of a nonprofit, get on a Zoom with the board and say, our executive director of 22 years is leaving and we're going to launch a search for a new one. And there was a lot of love for this woman. So like people were crying and, I was just like, I cannot believe that this is happening on the same day. But as it turned out, we didn't close on that day. It got delayed. And there were harsh words on the call with the buyer and our banker and profanity even.
Wow.
Who was speaking the harsh words? Both ways?
No, our banker.
Yeah, I would imagine the banker wants to close. Like,
the banker?
He's like, yeah.
Right. And this is why we hire him. He was a bulldog, and he was right, because he said every single day that goes by that we're not closing, anything could happen to derail this deal. And he wasn't even on video. It just like had a picture of the phone, and it was like screaming.
That's so good.
And then I got irritated, and I'm super snarky. I got snarky, and then I had to apologize.
You got snarky to the buyer?
To the buyer. I got a little snarky. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but I got snarky, and they were like...
What did you say?
I was just rude. Wait, can I say this? I'm going to get
like, hey guys,
am I going to get sued if I say what happened? I don't know.
Well, let's do paraphrasing. Let's take it a little step back from like these are probably confidential.
It seemed like a game at the end. It just seemed like a game. That they wanted more time. I don't know why they wanted more time, but we wanted it to close. So it became like every day. And that's why I ended up staying in South Carolina for like 2 weeks. And I'm like, when am I going to get to go home? At one point, I was going to go home, and then my plane got canceled after I was already on the plane, and they had taken my luggage, and I didn't get back my luggage I never got my luggage back until I got back to San Francisco. So I was wearing the same for 4 days. Had no time to go get new clothes because we were just round the clock. So I would sit at night in my hotel room in a towel.
Oh no, this sounds uncomfortable. I would be snarky.
I'd be like, come on, guys, it's closed.
Yeah, I'm like sitting in my towel at night, like with my wine, like watching, reading my emails, providing more documents that I've already provided 75 times. It was just, I was just over it. And so I got snarky, and I said, I just should have kept my cool. I didn't yell or anything, but I snarked pretty hard. And so I had to apologize. And then the next day is when I was finally like, screw it. I'm flying home because I don't know when this is going to happen. I'm homesick. So I flew home, and of course the thing closed while I was on the plane.
Wow.
That's so funny.
But yeah, in between that, there was a lot of stuff going on. Like our landlord needed to provide us with a document to basically let them take over our lease. And they were giving me such a hard time.
Yeah, the landlords are a big, yeah.
They were acting like I was running a DuPont factory of, with hundreds of people working there. I had 3,000 square feet in South Carolina, and the lease was up in 6 months. And they wanted, notarization, just all this stuff. I'm like, oh, you're killing me. And so, they would use things like that. Well, you don't have this landlord document yet. And that's where I got really snarky. I'm like, really? Is this 3,000 square feet in South Carolina? It's 6,000 a month. Really? Is that going to kill the deal? And then we had this situation where we had this phantom equity plan for our employees. Some were vested, some were partially vested, some were fully vested. And so when it got down to the wire, it was time. The buyer wanted us to get those agreements redeemed, basically signed off by our employees. So we had to call all of our employees, I think not all of them, but like 13 of them within 2 hours, all of them.
Wow.
And tell them we were selling the company. It was closing the next day, and here's how much you're going to get.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We were just kind of forced. We were forced into doing this within this certain time frame.
Right.
And I was heading off to the airport. I think this was actually maybe the flight that I can't remember. It's all a blur, but I had to call 7 people in 2 hours, 7 people that I really care about, and break the news and act like I'm giving them enough space to ask questions and have a conversation when there really wasn't. So I'm like acting, just thinking like, I hope you don't like want to talk to me for a half hour, because I can't talk to you for a half an hour. And it was all really fun. Actually, I was worried about the reactions, but the worst reaction I got was someone was just absolutely dazed and confused. And it was one of our younger employees. And like, we had given them this phantom equity agreement year before, and I don't think he knew what he was signing. And he was just like, okay, well, everyone's doing it, I'll do it. We tried to explain it well, but I don't know. Sometimes people don't listen because they're just like, this won't turn into anything, right? Okay. So he was the first one I called, and I'm like, hey, remember when we got those phantom equity agreements? Yeah. And I was like, well, we sold the company and it's closing tomorrow. And he's like looking at me. And I said, so here's the deal with your phantom equity agreement. He's like, oh, I don't get any. And I'm like, no, you get all of it. And he just, I don't think he really understood what vesting was. And the thing is if the deal had closed on time, he was only going to be 50% vested, but because it closed late, later, he was 100%
Wow.
vested.
How lucky for him. Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah.
So many little things.
So many little things. And those are the things that I really remembered, like these little things. And people say, what was the closing day like? And it's like, okay, the closing day was like this. And I made a video about it, but it's the little moments throughout the process that resonate more with me than the closing day. Just little things. And like, I remember I did what I thought was this fantastic power move, because being a woman is a little rough in this industry, and you never see any women in M&A. Never. I have never seen any women in M&A.
Actually, I've been thinking we'd love to get more women. That's why I love having you on the show. But yeah, we've interviewed like quite a few other women on the show as well.
I have not.
But don't you feel like a queen among a kingdom of nerds?
No, I feel like
That's what
I'm just so grateful to have learned so much, because I really didn't know anything, and I fully admit that. And I'm bored by the finance side until the check is written. That interests me, but the rest of it, like, I'm on the product side, I'm on the content side, I'm on the customer side. That's all the stuff I love and I'm good at. But it's the little moments along the way, like talking to the employees was very memorable to me. We had a big blow up with our management team. It's something that the buyer kind of forced us into that was not consistent with our culture. I'm not going to talk about it, but we had to do something and there was no other way out of it. And it was very inconsistent with our transparent culture. And so Tony got really mad at me and we started kind of yelling at each other, and then I cried. So that's what I meant when they were like tears and yelling and stuff. But I just love all these little funny stories that I can tell now. Like the first, I was like a little passive aggressive, and I have a chip on my shoulder that I never see any women in these spaces. And so the kickoff day with Leonis, with our bankers, they're great people, really nice. So I wasn't, they weren't jerks or anything, but I was just like, I bet there's not going to be any women in there. And well, they scheduled the meeting at 10. That means I have to meet at 7. Like, aren't I in charge? Why do I have to get up so early? So it was kind of grumpy. And so I had this really great black nightgown, and it looked almost like a cocktail dress. And I just happened to wear the nightgown to bed the night before. And I woke up and I'm like, I just put on a necklace and I put on some earrings. I put on a little makeup, and I logged onto the Zoom and I opened it up, and there's this New York conference room with a beautiful view and 7 guys in suits. And I'm like, I'm a badass bitch. I'm taking a nightgown. I'm like, fuck you, world, I made it.
That's awesome.
So it's all those little things, that resonate with me. I mean, of course, the money, it's very serious. It's lots of money. It's bankers and lawyers and all that stuff. But it's just those really poignant moments that stick with me. And I just had a blast. I thought doing the deal was so fun. I mean, of course, it turned out well, but from talking to all the bankers, talking to all those entrepreneurs and learning so much and hearing their stories, some told me stories of how they tried to do a deal directly with a PE firm, kind of the road I was initially headed down until Michael stopped me. And it failed and it was miserable. And then they explained they kind of had to go dark for 18 months before they started up again. It's kind of like, when you house on the market and it doesn't sell and you kind of have to quietly take it off the market for a while. It's the same thing. And so I heard a lot of things not to do, and it was just a great, fun experience. And I'm frustrated. A lot of the reason I started making this content is because, first of all, people would just ask me all kinds of questions. And I was frustrated that, I'm a late bloomer, so I'm going to turn 60 next year, and I just did this. I'm probably not going to do it again. So how can I get my knowledge out there? Because people need it, especially people like me who didn't go to school and study entrepreneurship and deal making, and who just create a business because they're trying to solve a problem. That's how I came to it. I was just trying to solve a problem, turned it into a company. And sure, I had dreams of selling it, but I don't think I really believed I would. But, every year that goes by and it gets more and more successful, you start to think, okay, well, I need this. And also I needed it for my retirement. I didn't save for retirement for a decade while I was building this thing because we just weren't paying ourselves enough.
No, and all those little bits do definitely make up the story. And I did love you sharing the story with us here today. There's so many little lessons there I'd love to eke out and cap on, but we are running to time, and I feel like we've started.
Oh no, my husband's eating God.
Yeah. He's like, meow.
No, if he hadn't been fed, he'd be on my shoulder right now, like sticking his head.
Okay. And so, okay. So I feel like we've really, I kind of just want to walk through a little bit more here and, of course, throw it to you if you have any questions. But I feel like we were able to go from the beginning of your business adventure and going to San Francisco and then ultimately building this business, doing everything yourself, building it up, growing it, those SaaS elements being so important. And then ultimately, I feel like a good one word, if I were to describe the story with a word to describe the story by theme of the story is you're really good at following with the timing of things because, so much there was so quick, right? You went through the process very quickly and most people would be like, what do I do? But I feel like, you did it right. And it makes a lot of the way you tell the story. It's like, that's exactly what it's supposed to sound like for somebody who's done it 10 times.
It was, I'm glad I didn't screw it up somehow. The timing was great. The team was fantastic. Michael, was there in my ear. He, even at the very end, he was calling me at like 9 p.m. in South Carolina, like, what's going on with the deal? Because it was supposed to close in a couple days. And I said, well, we're supposed to close on Wednesday. And he said, you got your employment agreement yet? I'm like, no, should I? And he's like, yes. He said, if you don't have an employment agreement, either they're not going to keep you or they don't know what they're doing, or I don't know. I don't even remember what the third one was. Maybe you can fill it in. So, I'm sitting in a Courtyard by Marriott conference room at this point. My partner's outside talking on the phone. So I run out. I'm like, Lee, listen to what Michael said. And so we call our lawyer and we're like, shouldn't we have this? And he's like, yeah, you should. I was a little mad at the lawyer at that point. So I'm like, why didn't you give us a heads up on this? So the next day, the lawyer and the banker kind of like forced the issue with the buyer. I don't know why, maybe they hadn't decided what they want to do, but they basically forced the issue. And then they said, we're going to give you consulting agreements, short-term consulting agreements. You'll be out of the business quickly. Yeah. Which, that was like a little grieving there for me. I was bummed. I was like crying and to my son on the phone that night. He's like, don't take it personally. They need to take control. They're actually lovely. I think I would have been, I really like the people. And so do my employees, like my ex-employees, I talk to them. They're like, oh, it's great. So that's nice.
We just like to tease. That's all.
I always make fun of them.
No, they're great, but I really was teary about it for a while, for like about a month. And you can't tell anyone because nobody wants to hear a millionaire whine. But I would tell my husband, I would, break into tears with my son again. And he'd be like, you just need to get over it, Mom. And at one point I said to my husband, I'm like, why did I do this? I shouldn't have done it. Should I not have done it? He's like, are you out of your mind? Like,
well, I think I guess there's a lesson there for other people is, when you start off the deal, recognize that you have to plan for what if you're going to stay on with the business. And that needs to be part of the deal package at the very beginning of the term sheet. Okay, you're going to be on in this capacity. But I'm not trying to do this to advise you. I'm not trying to push on the wound either. I totally hear you, what you experience, but it's a great learning moment for other people. And up front, you have to say if you want to stay on, be advisor, if you want to retain some equity, if you want an earn out, what are you going to do for all that? Because if you don't, and I can understand why you didn't get that, bringing it up later.
Well, we did bring it up quite a few times in the beginning. At the beginning, we're like, the deal goes on for a while before you even meet like the CEO, right? We met like the deal people. And then we were kind of a little bit down the road before my partner and I met the CEO. And so we brought it up and they say, what do you want to do? And the right answer is, whatever works for you guys, that's what our line was. We didn't want to create any friction for this deal. And they just kept saying, well, we'll discuss that once we learn a little bit more. And I think that's why I took it personally, because it's not something that was established up front before they knew me. It's what they decided after they knew me. And I was like, oh God, do they, I was like, oh, it's me, But then I learned, And this is what going into a deal like this was like for someone who's never done it before and doesn't really know how it works, and you're learning on your feet. Like, I talked to a girlfriend of mine who actually is in M&A. So I guess I know one. Well, she's a lawyer down in San Diego. She works as a corporate lawyer, but they do lots of acquisitions. And they acquire companies smaller than Boardroom Insiders. Sometimes they're a biotech. So sometimes they acquire companies that are like pre-money, pre-revenue or 2 million or something. And she's like, oh, no, we always want the founding team out immediately. She's like, that's just the way it works. You shouldn't take it personally. It's like, okay.
So that's very common. I see that you did bring it up earlier on. Like, there is definitely a two-way street there. It's like we were just talking to somebody about a deal the other day where one of the execs wanted to stay on, and that's
really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, because then because then if they don't want that person, then they could just be like, well, then that's not the business for us. And then if they were to say, well, we don't want that person, then you're running the risk of, okay, now is everybody in the business even going to want these buyers to acquire? Because in a way, they pissed everybody off at that point. The person who was their contact, so that's one way it can go. And then on the other hand, it's like just being, I always I say to people, super legal, a lawyer thing to do is like just specify up front, like if you would want to stay within the business, put it in the term sheet, say, you advisor, 2 years, this many hours a week, this capacity, like I do check-ins with the sales team, whatever it is that you feel like you want to keep doing. Again, it'll be a lesson for potential business sellers out there. Put it up front and make it part of the terms right away. Because if it's not, then in most deals we do, seller's not part of the deal. This to be clear. It's super uncommon.
Well, I think it worked out as it should have. It just, I need time to get over it, and it would have helped if I know for the reason I said. Like, I took it personally because I felt like once they knew me, they're like, oh,
get her out.
I told you about the English.
Well, even worse if they'd kept my partner and got rid of me. But actually, I could see why they would have done that, because I really had passed off all of my responsibilities, and he was still
Did you
a very strong.
Get to share the entirety of your vision with them in terms of, how you talked about how you wanted to create the kind of management consultant aspect of the business with a lot of the content writers? Like, did you share? Yeah. Did you get to give them the whole, because it sounds like the business could have really grown from there. And I'm kind of circling back to that aspect of the conversation previously.
I did, but
it sounds like they were more interested in the software anyway. So it was like,
well, they were, they said they were, but here's what surprised me is, and I've heard this from other people who have done deals, and I've heard it from the bankers too. It's like, in the end, it's all about the numbers. It really is. And it's about the numbers working out, making sure that you have high quality revenue, and not too many gaps in renewals and stuff like that. We spend so much time talking about the numbers. And, I set up logins for 50 people to go in and play with the product. Almost nobody logged in.
Oh, wow.
And, and even, I thought, well, and that can be expected, right? It's like, okay, it's like these two people that really matter, but there was almost no logging in, and not very many repeat logins either. And that disappointed me, because I was like, this thing is amazing. Like, I was in love with it. It was a special product. I don't know if it's just because, things got so busy, and I don't know why, and I've heard similar things before. It's like, all they really care about are the numbers. Even when I was trying to there was a brief period where I was trying to raise venture capital for it before Lee came on the scene. And this venture capitalist said, stop talking about the quality of your product. Nobody cares. And that, I'd had a negative experience before with VCs. And so after that, I'm like, not even going to try. I don't even want their money. I'm just going to do it on my own. Because you want people who care about your product. You want people to care about what you're building, and that it's not a shell game of growth at all costs. And then you build something that's really shitty and just try to sell it as quick as possible because you've got a bunch of users. Don't get me wrong, there's amazing innovation that happens. but there's a lot of BS, and I learned a lot of that over the years. And I was very insecure about my lack of knowledge and lack of funding and status and all that stuff. And I remember going to a SaaS conference, and it was all about sales and MarTech. And we've considered ourselves in the MarTech space. So I'm like going around and trying to talk to people and listening to all the presentations and taking notes earnestly. And it was like, like a big hype fest. And there was this woman there named Jill Rowley. I don't know if you know her, but she was kind of this big sales thought leader. She made gazillions of dollars in sales at Oracle. And I knew her, and she was on the last panel of the day. She's very knowledgeable. And she said, and everyone's bragging about their stuff. And she's like, well, the fact of the matter is, with all this sales tech out there, sales productivity has not improved in like a decade. And I went like, wait, what? And then it was like, good night, everybody. And I just sat with that. And I was like, then what's all this about if it's not improving sales productivity? And so I later realized that these were all big VC backed, like heavily backed sales tech companies. And when I thought back to the presentations and like case studies, they were all using each other's stuff. I'm sure they had some solid customers too, but they were all using each other's tools and kind of hyping them up. And 6 months later, a lot of those companies weren't even really in business anymore. So it's just, I don't know, maybe I exaggerate a little bit, but that's what I was seeing. Mm-hmm. And I'm a very authentic person, which you probably gathered. And I like to build real things. I don't want to be part of something that's not real and pleasing real customers, solving real problems. And I'm not saying they don't, but there's also a lot of...
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, VCs are traditionally known to just follow the hype, and that's kind of like the big critique of VCs. And that's also where VCs usually end up eating it as well, is because they just often...
And one thing I'll add in there, Sharon, too, I was thinking about from halfway-ish through the call, I was just thinking, you know so much about the space, so many people in the space. I understand you just went with an exit. I'm about to contradict what I'm about to say. I'm the type of person who's like, I'd rather relax and do advisory work than be like gung-ho and building the next big thing. But it just sounds like you have so much expertise in the space. I wouldn't be surprised if you built something else awesome.
I don't think I could do the bootstrapping thing again. I'm over that. I don't know what it would look like because I don't want to be at a big VC funded company either. I like what I'm doing now, but I have to build a business model around it because if you watch my video about how I've spent the money, like I was making up for lost time. And as someone put it to me in a comment on my video, yeah, you don't have fuck you money, so you better be careful. Like, I could live another 40 years and never make $1, right? So I tried to be retired for a while, but I hated it. I didn't want to go play pickleball. I did play pickleball and I like it. I don't want to, if someone calls me to play pickleball when I'm in the middle of researching something, I don't want to go. I want to do what I'm doing. And so that's why I've been looking for something else to do. And the content has resonated, which is great because I'm enjoying that. And I have a book coming out in May and I have ideas for 2 more books. And one of those is partially written. So, but what's the business model? Because as the person said, I don't have fuck you money and I have all these things I want to do, right? I really would like to have a second chapter that's very lucrative because if I want to go on a vacation that's $10,000 a person a week, I want to go. But right now I'm just like, no, that's too risky. That's too much money because I want to go with my whole family, right? I want to go with my 2 adult sons too. And it's like, that's $40,000. It's like
you're in the Bay Area. And you're like you're like an alumni. You're like the established elite now. You have joined the bureaucracy. That's not what I meant. You know what I meant. The bourgeoisie. So, I mean, the path people, and we know a lot of VCs, we've been in tech for a while. What a path a lot of people take is they use that leverage and they go find like the fastest growing businesses in their space. And then they go, now you're able to be part of that conversation, whereas before you're just kind of like, oh, what can I do? And it's kind of like, there's like a saying, it's like, I can't remember the saying because I'm so bad at quotes. I've never was a fan of them. It's kind of like,
go far.
If you want to,
if you want Yeah, go ahead.
What I got, it's like if you want to find the most wealth, go to where all the people are gathering all the resources. It's like, don't go to Nevada and retire. Go to the center of the Bay Area in that industry and be part of those in the businesses. And that's how, I mean, I'm a finance lawyer, right? That's where you're going to get the best terms. Like you could get equity just for like advisor work and people are happy to give away a few points. I'm not trying to give you advice on what to do. I'm just trying to say this is a common thing people usually do at that point. If you want to maximize capital, then again, that's not like what I would actually recommend is go meditate in the woods.
That has to come out of this conversation like at some point for sure. But yeah.
I once do a meditation on my Peloton app and I got so bored. I gave up after 5 minutes.
But you've also been conditioned. Oh my God. You've also been conditioned to be like high performance person for so many years. And that's what it is when people sell their business. We have seen it many times where they're like, oh crap, what am I? You know, they wake up. It's kind of like a soldier. They wake up at 5 a.m. ready for war. And that's what happens when you're an entrepreneur for so long. And, you know, that's part of life, you know, and that's part of the rigmarole. And again, I try to share this with first-time sellers every once in a while. I try to say one of my lessons there, and I built and sold 2 businesses. They each went different ways. It's very interesting. Not getting into my story here today, but essentially, you know, I definitely didn't have the bug after. I was more so like, sweet, now I can go read more and go do my own thing. But yeah,
I'm going to take it in a different direction. I believe in what's called the entrepreneur path to enlightenment, which is like you start out as an entrepreneur, you like experience VCs, and you're like, VCs, you know. And then every entrepreneur, you know, that's successful kind of, you know, finds their way to becoming a VC. And so I'm curious what your thought. And so I think that the 2 kind of pathways that I would like to take this conversation before we close. One is, what are your thoughts on, for example, raising a fund and empowering other authentic entrepreneurs that you align with and, you know, being kind of the different standard VC that actually helps people build real things and that is outside of kind of that little inner circle that you described that you observed. That's the first thing. And then I would love to hear about this book, and then we can kind of move to close from there.
Well, what you said sounds amazing. I don't know how to do that. I would not know where to start. Michael. Gotta have Michael on next. He's amazing.
We would love that.
I guess other rich people, right? Super, but really rich people. The great thing about Michael was, and I tell this to everybody when they're like, well, what about friends and family and seed money? I'm like, that's great. Make sure you get it from people who are always, they're already so rich, they're not going to miss it. Because I was putting enough pressure on myself about losing his money. I'm like, I can't lose this money. I think that's one of the reasons why I succeeded, because I didn't want to lose Michael's money. I would just be horrified at doing that. Would that every entrepreneur were so, you know, responsible with the money. But yeah, I mean, my passion and mission is to empower other entrepreneurs from non-traditional backgrounds like mine and also demystify it. Like, I feel like there's so much jargon and so much posturing and maybe keeping back a lot of what's going on from people. Like, the one thing people keep telling me is nobody says this stuff. Nobody talks about it.
I noticed that too. I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Why? I hope I'm not going to get sued and find out why.
No, I feel like you're just really like, you know.
I find it so interesting. And like, why would you not tell people? And, you know, the first meeting I had after I sold the business, I met with another entrepreneur who's also a personal friend. He had a food business. You might know him. His name's Dave, and it was Dave's Gourmet, and they have the hottest hot sauce in the world. He ran it for years. He started it, ran it, sold it. And so we're having lunch and after both of our exits, and we're just sitting there talking and blah, blah, blah. I'm, you know, being all vague and he's being vague. And he's like, why don't we just tell each other what we made? And I was like, oh, okay. And we just started talking about it. And so that kind of, and then, you know, I hear from a lot of my kids' friends, and they're super into financial transparency, and, you know, they're all on TikTok. So people said, get on TikTok. And I'm like, what? That's so weird that I would do that. But then it just, it took off. But, to get back to your question, anything that will help other entrepreneurs get a leg up who don't have access to the world of capital, and that would be amazing for me. But really, I don't know how to do what you just said. I don't know how to run a fund. I don't really know how to evaluate companies for investment because I'm weak on the finance side, and I'm totally transparent about that. It's not what I am passionate about. It's very important, but I would need a partner who's really adept, very...
You've proven that I was going to say, you found a lead.
I'm just kidding.
Take Lee or find another Lee. Or...
Lee and we adore each other, but I think he's had enough of me for one lifetime. But that's really interesting. But it's like, I'm trying to figure that out. What can I do besides put out content? I mean, I would love to make a pile more money, not just for me, but I love giving money to charity. I would instead of managing my own content and doing my own stuff here on the computer, I would just like to show up and pay someone else well to do all that other stuff. But I can't do that yet. So how do I do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Let's talk after the recording.
Yeah, no, totally hear you in that respect. I think we gave you just want to make sure that the point lands, 2 potential pathways to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. One is consulting for equity. So just finding other entrepreneurs that you really resonate with and, that are aligned with, your journey and what you have established your expertise in, and offering your services for equity and helping them get to exit. So, that would be a really great pathway to do more of what you've done without necessarily needing to really get into the business. So, just being an advisor. And then the second thing is, you're talking to all these VCs and so on and so forth. And the greater your visibility is, the more magnetism you'll be able to, for example, implement that strategy that you implemented in your business, where just start getting on the phone with people and being like, hey, this is my vision. I want to empower entrepreneurs. And, what do you think about investing, a couple $1 million into this fund, for example? And, I'll distribute it for you so that both of us could make piles and heaps of money. And, you have the expertise to show for it. So those are, 2 potential kind of...
Yeah. If you look at running a fund, it's not that complicated. Also, you left out number 3, which was go relax.
Meditate in the woods. Yeah, that's right.
Relax. That's number 3.
No, I don't think that's the way she.
I have to say it because I leave. So.
No, all this stuff is fun for me. I mean, the fun sounds very scary, and I like being scared because that means that, that might be something to do. When I'm scared to do something, it usually turns out well, because that means it's a growth opportunity for me. I was scared to put out those videos about my deal. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh my God, should I be doing this? Is this crazy? And then, I put it out and it was very popular. But then one day my neighbor sent me a text and she's like, my daughter just saw you on Twitter and you have 1 million views. I was like, what? Because I haven't even been on Twitter in a long time. It's kind of a cesspool. And so I went over there and I was like, wow, there it was. And venture capitalists and all kinds of people commenting and speculating and making assumptions. And that was kind of fun to go in and answer a lot of the comments, because people were saying things like, well, there's no way she's in California. And I'm in California. There's no way this was a cash deal. She must have gotten equity. I'm like, 100% cash.
That's legit.
How fun.
Well, now that we've talked about we've really come full circle. We went from the beginning and now we're already talking about the future. We naturally...
Well, I think this is great. I mean, I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about it with smart people who know more than I do on the deal side, because I really don't know that much. I don't know about funds. It's very exciting to me and scary, but I do want to do something else. So give me a call, people.
Sure. All this stuff.
But, I am talking to people every day who I meet through the content. Actually, my biggest challenge right now, that's how I met you all. My biggest challenge right now is I'm inundated and I do want to help people, but I can't just sit in my office 10 hours a day and do it for free, right? So love the idea, advisory for equity. I like that idea because my investment dollars are committed. So it's not like I can invest in a company right now. But yeah, I'm open to all of those things and I'm just having a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. And all the quick throw up for you on that too. Check out the FAST agreement. Are you aware what that is?
The what? You broke up?
Or check out the FAST agreement. I'm totally forgetting my acronyms. That's what my aging memory says. Is that right? That's the name of it, right?
I can't remember. It's a form document that you can find that essentially will allot a certain amount of equity.
No, so it's in the tech industry, it's the go-to form for advisory contract, and it has embedded in it the share grant. And if you ever do that type of work, everybody uses that agreement. Use that agreement. After we click off record, I'll double check to make sure I'm not forgetting my letters.
I'll send you the link to it after this on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah, but go ahead, Joe.
But it's a great agreement that really says, hey, here's the limited scope of responsibility for advisory work, and here's the amount of equity. And it's great because you shouldn't be using random forms for that, and neither should you be paying a lawyer a lot of money to generate you that type of form. It's totally standardized nowadays. Definitely use that for that type of work.
Yeah, thank you. I wondered about that. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, you when my partner and I were struggling early on, we'd devour the news about which company was acquired and how much. And you see serial entrepreneurs do this several times, people who had much, much bigger exits than we did. And we would say, why do they do something else? Like, why don't they just relax? Who needs to go and start another company? And now I get it. I get it because I tried to do that. And what I noticed right away, I was driving in the car with a friend who works at a startup, and I started, asking him a ton of questions, and I felt my heart speed up like, oh boy, that's so cool. Wow, that's so neat. I miss it. And so I think some people are just wired that way. And once you do it and you've been successful and had a lot of fun. I mean, there was a lot of pain too, but early on, but it was really fun and I miss it and I want to do something else.
You definitely have best wishes from us in your future endeavors. I'll put a little prayer in for you. And I bet you're going to definitely land on your feet though, because I can tell by, how your sale and everything went, and you definitely know what you're doing. And you have good people that you rely on too, like call Michael. That's the lesson of the story. Is call Michael.
Yeah, everybody, call Michael Blend. There, I said his last name. Now he's going to be inundated.
It's so hilarious. But for sure, we have our best wishes.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you so much. This has been a blast. I really enjoyed it. Great questions and really fun discussion. So thank you.
Likewise. Usually we end with like a tip of the day, but I think we've given so many tips, in this conversation that we can extract at this point. And I really could, keep talking for much longer just because you're such a great storyteller. But just for the purposes of closing us out, yeah, thanks so much, Sharon, for joining us on the show this week. And all of your ways that people can contact you will be in the show notes under the podcast in the description. And I'll follow up with you about, which contact information you'd like to have in there and so on and so forth. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us this week.
All right. Thank you. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too. And everyone out there, make sure to follow, like, subscribe for more content like this. And thanks everyone out there for joining us as well for another episode of the SaaS Buyers Club. I'm your host, Omeed.
And I'm your co-host, Joe.
And this week we interviewed Sharon Gillenwater. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.